Hi, everybody. It's great to see you all. I'm in DC in my office. We've been in session for a couple of weeks. As I'm sure most of you know, there's a lot going on right now, particularly in our efforts to respond to the coronavirus, and I'll say a few words about that in just a moment, but also wanted to just let you know about the other big thing that has been on our minds the last few weeks up here in the House of Representatives, and that's the loss of our friend and colleague, John Lewis. And if anybody tunes out of this call to watch the ongoing service, which is happening right now down in Georgia, I certainly will not be offended. I was just watching President Obama and President Bush deliver some very, very wonderful and very appropriate words. When I was elected, I came down to DC for one of our first new member of Congress orientations. And yeah, it is very much like high school. You've got all these freshmen trying to figure out their place in this institution. And one evening, they put on a dinner for us at the Library of Congress, and we're all getting our food in the great hall of the Library of Congress, which is one of the most beautiful rooms, beautiful spaces in all of Washington. And I got my meal, and I went over to sit down at a table that was completely empty. And I sat there for several minutes watching the other members, wondering, is anyone going to come and sit with me? Yes, it really feels like the first day of high school. And eventually somebody sat down with me, and it was John Lewis. And I felt, oh my goodness, I'm here. And here is somebody who is not only a member of Congress, a member of this extraordinary institution that I had the privilege of joining, but somebody who is a living link to American history, the history of our civil rights movement and our struggles to build a more perfect union all those years ago, struggles which continue to this day. He then got up and gave us a speech. It was his classic speech about the importance of everybody getting into good trouble. And what he meant by that was not that all of us needed to go to some bridge to get beaten up marching for civil rights. What he meant was that it's worth taking a risk sometimes in life to do what's right. It's worth risking an argument. It's worth risking a conflict to fight for something that you believe in. And that's something that stuck with me in every day that I've been a member of a House, trying my best to represent you all here in Washington, D.C. This week we said goodbye to him, and there were a lot of ceremonies. In many of them, you may have seen, if you watched any of it on television, that his coffin was borne by a group of soldiers, sailors, and Marines who had volunteered to be his pallbearers. And I learned at some point this week that these young men and women who had volunteered to perform that duty did so knowing that they would have to self-quarantine for 14 days after being in such close proximity to each other and to others at all the different ceremonies in Washington. And I found that quite moving, actually. It was a fitting example of the kind of responsible self-sacrifice that I think is required of all of us, particularly those of us in positions of responsibility today. A spirit of responsible self-sacrifice, of putting others before yourself, that I think is too often missing in our politics right now. And it has been sometimes missing in our response to the coronavirus. So let me make the transition now to the work that we have to do. We've been through a lot in New Jersey together over the last few months. And right now, I think I would bring you some good news and some bad news. The good news is we are the only state in the United States that has recorded a daily decline in coronavirus, new coronavirus cases for 2 straight weeks. This was true at least until a couple of days ago, before some of these house party problems that we've been having in different parts of the state. But for 2 straight weeks, we saw a decline in cases. We were the only state in America to see that. That's the good news. Bad news is we were the only state in America that saw that kind of decline. So good on us. We made the tough decisions. We made the sacrifices. We did what we had to do. But unfortunately, not everybody in America did. And we are not isolated. We're not an island. We're connected to every other part of this country. And one manifestation of that, one result is, if you want to get a coronavirus test in New Jersey right now, it's really easy. That's the good news. We worked really hard to make it easy to get a test, but you're not going to get your results in most cases for up to 10 days, which means it's almost worthless. And the reason for that is not anything we've done in New Jersey, but because the labs are overwhelmed with tests from other states where this thing has been surging because leaders made bad decisions. They reopened too early. They didn't encourage people to wear masks. They made decisions that are now affecting us in a very bad way. So here we are. 4 months ago, we passed the CARES Act in Congress. We spent a lot of your money to buy this country time to mount a proper public health response to coronavirus, just like every other advanced country in the world has succeeded in doing. We did not succeed in doing it because of some of these irresponsible decisions elsewhere, including at the highest levels in Washington. So now we have to do it again. We've got to spend more money to buy our country more time to get this thing under control so that we can be healthy again, so that we can get back to work, so that we can get our economy going. 2 months ago, as you know, the House of Representatives, I think, did its job. We passed the HEROES Act, which was meant to be the next and potentially last big coronavirus relief bill. 2 months we've been waiting for Majority Leader McConnell in the Senate to give us his answer. Finally, this week, we got the answer. It was, I think, woefully insufficient, but at least it puts us in a position where we can start negotiating. And I'm hoping that by the end of next week, we can actually get a deal and deliver some more help to the American people. Now, the big differences between where we are and where the Senate is, for me, most important one is that in the House bill, we included very generous relief for our state, our county, and our local governments. This was my number one priority. I led the bill in the House with over 150 Democratic and Republican co-sponsors to get this done. Every one of our municipalities, every one of our counties needs this and wants this because they can't print money. They have to balance their budgets. And if they're going to continue to provide us basic services, police, fire, rescue, schools, they need some relief from the federal government. So we insisted on that in the House. The Senate bill provides exactly $0 for that purpose. Other issues, coronavirus testing, contact tracing. We asked for more than the Senate did, but they did at least include something. So that's an area where I think we can find agreement. We agree that we need to provide support directly to schools to help them reopen safely where that's possible in the fall. One big difference, we have funding in our bill to help states ensure that every one of us can vote safely in November. The Senate provided no funding there. We also provide funding in our House bill for the post office. The Senate provided none. I'm increasingly concerned about this because we now know that the Postmaster General, who was just recently put in there by the president, did in fact order the post office to slow down mail delivery. And we're getting a lot of complaints from across the district. Now, I'm worried about the impact this will have on the election in November if we don't fix it by then. But we're feeling it right now. We're all more dependent on the post office than we have been in recent years because where many of us are stuck at home, we're dependent on deliveries. It's absolutely outrageous that this is happening. The post office is the most basic function of our government going back to before we were even a country. Ben Franklin was our first postmaster general, for goodness sakes. This is fundamental. And the post office is bleeding money, not because of anything the post office did wrong, but because of requirements that Congress put in place in the mid-2000s that they pre-fund their pension system for their employees 50 years in advance, which was ridiculous. So this is something we are insisting on getting fixed in this coronavirus bill. And I'm pretty confident that we will get it done. I'm going to have a hard time voting for anything that does not deal with that challenge. So there's a lot more in these bills, a lot more that has to be done, and I'm sure your questions will bring out a lot of those issues. We got to figure out what to do with the unemployment benefits that are set to expire, that are expiring right now because the Senate was late in coming to the table. So one way or another, we're going to deal with that, with the stimulus payments. I think there's general agreement that there needs to be one more round of those. But I'm sure you guys have questions on all those issues. So I think I'm going to stop here and open the floor to you all to put your issues and questions on the table. Thank you again for joining. Look forward to a great discussion.
Thank you, Tom. As mentioned earlier, for everyone, after we take a few questions that were previously submitted, we will open up for live questions. So if you do have a question you would like to ask the congressman at any point, please just type your question out in the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Please include your name and the town you're from, and pay attention to that, and I'll let you know when you're up next to ask a question. Tom, your first previously submitted question. How will the November election be handled? Will registered voters automatically receive vote by mail ballot?
We don't know yet. That's a decision that Governor Murphy and the state have to make. Myself and other members of the congressional delegation have been speaking to the governor about this. My main recommendation to him is that he decide quickly, because whatever we do, we're going to need the time to put the necessary systems in place so that we can not have chaos on election day in November. We just ran a mostly vote by mail primary election, and in many ways it went well, but in one way it has not gone well. It's taken way too much time for the final results to be tabulated. I don't want us to be sitting around for 2 or 3 weeks after November 3rd trying to figure out who won all these races. I have a selfish interest in that, but I don't think any of us want to live with that suspense. Certainly not in the presidential race or congressional races or any other. So we're going to need time if we are going to rely heavily on mail again, to be able to put the necessary systems in place. My piece of this is trying to make sure that Congress delivers some support to the states to help us get this done. We got a little bit in the CARES Act. The HEROES Act, which we passed in the House, provides a lot more. We are fighting hard for that. I'm relatively confident. I don't want to be certain, but I'm relatively confident that in the final package that we agree to with the Senate, we will get something. There was an interesting tweet today from the president. A lot of people focused on the silly part of it, in which he said maybe we should delay the election. We're not going to delay the election. The president doesn't have the authority to do that. I noticed what he said about vote by mail. He keeps saying it's corrupt, it's crooked, which is nonsense. We have 5 states in America where everybody, 100% of the people vote by mail every single election, and it's fine. But he did say that he's okay with absentee voting. He doesn't want universal vote by mail, but he's okay with absentee voting. So my response to that was, okay, maybe you don't like states mailing everybody a ballot, which is what we did in New Jersey, fine, whatever. But can we at least agree that every state should allow all of its voters the right to request an absentee ballot, and that the federal government should help them prepare for what's going to be a really complicated election in November with a little bit more resources? Based on that tweet, like, there should be a compromise there that we can get to. So that's what I'm suggesting to our leadership here. Like, take the part of it that actually was promising, ignore the parts that were crazy, and see if we can come to a deal.
Thank you, Tom. Your next question. How do we send kids and teachers back to school safely in the fall?
I don't know if we can. And, it shouldn't be a decision that a president makes or a member of Congress makes. It's got to be a decision that our school administrators make after consulting with parents and teachers. I would say the number one priority has got to be safety. We've got to be a country that values human life and that puts the health and safety of our people, and in this case, our kids and our teachers, ahead of all other things. So if it's safe, absolutely. I want to see our kids return to in-person instructions. It is far, far better than using this kind of platform for education. But it has to be safe. And the role of a politician, a member of Congress, a governor, a president, has got to be not to order the schools to reopen, but to help the schools reopen safely. We have to deliver what we can deliver to ensure that our local school districts can do this safely. So what does that mean? It means testing and contact tracing, for example. Again, we've worked really hard in New Jersey to make sure the testing is widely available. That's a success. But if it's taking 10 days to get your test results back, then it's not useful. I would like to be able, as part of a school reopening plan, be able to tell teachers and even students, you can get tested regularly. Maybe that should be part of the plan, so that if somebody does come down with the coronavirus, they can be quickly identified and isolated. But if you have to wait 10 days for the test result, you can't do that, because what do you do for the 10 days after you get the test? So that's, if we want schools to reopen, that's what we got to be working on. Slow the spread of the disease. We've done a better job of that in New Jersey than anywhere else. So if New Jersey were all of America, we'd be in a better position to reopen schools. But if this thing is still raging in large parts of the country, because, let me put this bluntly, because some of our leaders were more interested in opening bars than schools, then we're not going to be able to open schools. And I'm angry about that. So, if you're talking to your congressman or your governor or your president, I think that's got to be the question. Not should schools reopen, but what are you doing to help schools reopen? And for me, and what I want to do in the House, get that testing and contact tracing, get a proper public health response to the coronavirus, empower the CDC, empower our health care experts, leaders setting a good example by wearing masks, all of that stuff. If we can get that right, as every other advanced country has done, we can open schools safely this fall.
Thank you, Tom. We'll now switch over to taking some live questions. For the live question portion, these are all questions that you submitted through the chat feature. As we do go down that list, please just make sure you're paying attention to the chat feature. I will let you know when you're coming up next and any other instructions, or if you have any questions on how to unmute yourself or anything from there, we can definitely address through the chat feature. Once I do let you know you're next and we get to your turn, I will call on you. From there, you can feel free to unmute yourself and begin asking your question to the congressman. If you're having any troubles or any issues, I'm definitely here on standby to help try to unmute you or try to help get to the bottom of it, and we can get you to ask your question live. But other than that, that's about it for the live question piece. Our first question comes from Kathleen. Kathleen, can you hear us?
Yes.
Perfect.
Me?
Yep, I can hear you.
Hi. I have a I have a few. The one is the money for the FBI building being taken out of the new stimulus package?
I hope so. So all that is being negotiated now. So for those who don't know about this, there were some weird things that the Senate put into their proposal. One was they put a bunch of money for military spending, for F-35 planes, Apache helicopters, other things that the Pentagon wasn't even asking for. It was just a gift to defense contractors. And what business? I mean, I'm pro-defense. I'm willing to spend money on our military, but that stuff has no business in a coronavirus bill. Another piece was this money for a new FBI building in Washington. And I think even Senator McConnell was a little bit embarrassed by this, because what's going on there is that this building will be across the street from President Trump's hotel on Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington. And apparently the Trump organization is worried that another hotel chain was planning to build a hotel on that spot. And so they wanted to build a new FBI building to prevent that.
Wasn't it $1.7 billion?
$1.7 billion, yeah. So again, I don't know, maybe we need a new FBI building. I'm not, I'm pro FBI. I want them to have a good facility, but it has no business in a coronavirus bill. And so, I'd like to see that out. But I gotta tell you, like, this is high stakes. We've got tens of millions of people who've lost their jobs. We've lost over 150,000 American lives. There are some things that we desperately need. And, at the end of the day, these guys come to me and say, I'll give you your money for coronavirus testing and for state and local government relief and for the post office and for a safe election. And we just got to give Trump $1 billion to, for corrupt purposes. What would you have me do?
Oh, I agree. If we get everything we want.
I'd probably say yes. I'd hold my nose. No. And I'd come back and tell you exactly what we did and why, so that you know what's going on. But this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with folks who aren't entirely on the level. That's why I started with the example of those pallbearers and self-sacrifice. We desperately need all of us, whether we're conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat, whether we agree on everything or not, to put our duty to others first, rather than thinking about ourselves at a moment like this. And that's a good example of somebody's thinking about themselves first.
How is the postal pension being fixed?
Well, that's something we need legislation to do, because I think, right now they need basically just some relief to be able to continue running mail operations at the level that we're used to. But we also need to change the legislation that was adopted in the mid-2000s that placed this, I think, unreasonable requirement on the Postal Service. No major American corporation pre-funds its pensions 50 years in advance. So that's something we're still going to have to do.
Okay, can you come back to me? I don't want to hog the time. I have two more.
Okay, why don't we take a few more, and then hopefully we'll have time.
All right.
And by the way, everyone can leave questions in the chat. If we don't get to all your questions, we'll try to get to them afterwards.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. For everyone on the call, I know there's a few questions coming in regards to casework. So I will be sending around, everyone should see in their chat feature now, an email address. If you have any issues or seeking help with unemployment claims, small business loans, or having any other issues with federal agencies, please send the email to the email address I just sent around to everyone. and someone from our office will be in contact with you. Again, that's for anyone seeking help with any unemployment claims, small business loans, or any other issues with federal agencies. Thank you.
Thanks. And by the way, DeAndre, I mean, I'm happy to hear some of those things because, like, we're not going to be able to resolve a case necessarily in the next hour, but it's important that we all hear what's going on with the experiences that folks are having trying to access that assistance. So I'm more than happy to take a few individual questions on those.
Most definitely, Tom. We do have
Thanks.
a few in the queue that
Okay.
we'll pass along to you. Our next question comes from Andrew. Andrew, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Hi, Tom.
Okay.
First of all, thank you as always for all you are doing on behalf of us in NJ07 and New Jerseyans in general and Americans. I really, really appreciate it. My question has to do with federal funding. Governor Murphy in his briefings continues to stress how critically important it is that we receive some federal funding. This pandemic and the economic fallout has just been devastating to the state budget, and he continues to stress how critically important that is. So my question is, doesn't that need to be in whatever ultimate
Yes,
bill
it is.
it's
Yeah, so that's what I was referring to when I mentioned relief for state and local governments. Now, we did get some from the CARES Act. The total number that we got was actually quite high, but that's a little bit deceptive because the Senate in the CARES Act insisted that money, that we put a lot of restrictions in place on how that money could be used. So it can be used, the money that the state already got can be used to cover direct COVID-19 expenses, like, if you have to buy masks, if you have to buy PPE, if you have to set up a COVID-19 testing station, the state can use money for that. But it could not use the money to make up for revenues lost because of coronavirus, lost because of the economic shutdowns. And that's the big problem, that the economy is slowed down, obviously, which means tax revenue is slowed down, which means the state doesn't have money for any of the stuff that we expect it to do for us, beginning with education, beginning with public safety, the most basic functions. So in the Senate bill, to be fair, one of the things they offered was greater flexibility for the states to spend the money that was already allocated. So I'll take that. That's good. But we are going to need considerably more just based on the revenue projections that we are seeing. And remember, it's not just the state, it's also each and every one of our municipalities, as well as the counties. So this is stuff that touches all of our lives. Every one of your mayors, every one of your councils has to balance their budgets, and they've got a legal obligation to fund the schools first, which means that if revenues are down by 10%, they still have to send the same amount of money to the school district and then take that 10% cut out of what's left, which means a 20, 30, 40, 50% cut in police, fire, rescue, public works. Imagine how that's going to affect our lives. That's what I'm trying to avoid. And again, this is totally nonpartisan inside our district. I'm a Democrat. Most of the mayors that I work with are Republicans. We're in 100% agreement that this is needed. And, it's something that I'm insisting on, and not just me, that I've got Pelosi and Hoyer and all of our leadership saying this is our number one priority in these negotiations. So, I can't imagine us going home without getting something more than we already have.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you both. Our next question comes from Karen. Karen, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Go ahead with your question.
Can confused. I do not want the weekly unemployment benefit to hinder job seeking.
Mhm.
On the other hand, when you take unemployment, and I am furloughed, so for the first time after 40 years of working, I did. It's known what your income is. So why cannot the weekly supplement be tied to an income level so that it doesn't discourage employment seeking? But yet for people like me with 2 tuitions, a mortgage, property tax that just went up, can afford all the things that I need to do, because unemployment alone will not do that.
That's a really, really good question. So we made a choice in the CARES Act to take care of a lot of people who had to be furloughed, who couldn't go to work, using the unemployment system. And, you know, the argument for that was it's a system that exists. It kind of made sense. People are unemployed, so let's try to help them through enhanced unemployment benefits. The problem with it has been that unemployment compensation in our country is run by our state unemployment agencies. And they were just not equipped in New Jersey or just about anywhere else to deal with suddenly tens of millions of Americans applying for unemployment at the same time. And so we still have people, I imagine we have folks on this call who are still having problems getting the enhanced unemployment that we promised them several months ago. One reason why it would be hard to tie it to income is that the state unemployment agencies don't have that information. To figure out a system for getting it and applying it to the hundreds of thousands of people in New Jersey who are collecting unemployment, we fear would just break the system. I mean, it's already almost broken. It would break it further if we had to force them to do that. So what's the solution? The best solution is the path that we did not choose, unfortunately, and I'm still arguing for us to choose this path, which is to ditch a lot of the stuff that we put into place and instead do what a lot of European countries did, which is to use our tax agency, the IRS, to provide direct income support to all Americans through their employers. So if you were furloughed, the way it would work is the IRS would provide, through your employer, direct income support to you based on what you were earning. And if your company turns out to actually be making a lot of money right now, when they file their tax return next year, they would have to show that, and they would pay a lot of that subsidy back. The advantage of this is the IRS has all this information, right? They know how many employees your company has. They know exactly how much you and every other employee makes. So it would actually be possible to design this in exactly the way that you're suggesting. So I co-sponsored a bill to do that, which interestingly had a lot of very liberal Democrats on it and also some very conservative Republicans. And I still wish that that's the direction we would go in. If we don't, then we're stuck with the system that we have, which is kind of these rickety state unemployment agencies trying to not make a total mess of things. And it's going to be hard, I think, to do anything complicated, to do anything that requires them to decide, to determine how much each individual gets based on their income. It's a lot easier for them to do it if we say everyone gets $600 a week or everyone gets $400 a week. So I think that's probably where we're going to end up. Although, as I mentioned, I would much prefer to go to a totally different system.
How would that system work if, for example, in this COVID time, for companies that aren't going to make it through COVID? So now it's going to come out of their taxes, but in fact, those companies are closing.
Well, we would still have to rely on the unemployment system as a backstop. if a company really just can't make it. But the hope would be, and this is, we also have the Paycheck Protection Program. We have the small business loans, which have been very, very successful in our district and around the country. The hope would be to use that kind of system to help companies that are struggling kind of stay in hibernation through the COVID crisis, so that even if they're not doing a lot of business with the income support, or in the case of PPP, with forgivable loans, they're able to survive and get back in the swing of things once the economy is able to reopen. And I think we are going to be successful with most companies in helping them get through this. The PPP program was not perfect, but it actually has been in some quite successful, and I think we're going to renew that in some form in this next coronavirus bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Rohan. Rohan, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay, go ahead with the question.
I want to start by saying I'm happy with the amendments that you have sponsored on the NDAA regarding the situation in Yemen and Libya. But last week you voted against an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act, which is 10% of the defense budget.
Mm-hmm.
This translates to freeing up roughly $74 billion federally. And to put that in perspective, if that money was divided up equally per person, our district NJ7 would get close to $170 million. My question is, how do you justify spending that much money that will largely go to controversial foreign wars while we are in the middle of a historical health emergency, facing a climate crisis, and seeing record unemployment along with other issues?
Yeah. So thanks for the question. If folks didn't hear, because you were breaking up a little bit, the question is why I voted against a 10% across the board cut in defense spending last week. It was an amendment to a defense bill that we had on the floor of the House. And I'll tell you why, very simply, because I do believe that our country faces very serious threats around the world, both real and potential threats, that is important for us to maintain a strong military to deter. I also believe that there's a lot of waste in the Pentagon budget. I think there are a lot of individual weapon systems that we fund year in and year out that, from a rational defense point of view, don't make a lot of sense. I don't think we need to continue to be building massive aircraft carriers, for example, that the Chinese military, with their increasingly advanced capabilities, can probably shoot out of the water without very much difficulty. I think Congress needs to be much more responsible in examining these programs, program by program, weapon system by weapon system. But I do not believe that across the board cuts are responsible, whether we're talking about our military, our State Department, our Department of Health and Human Services, or anything else. Across the board cuts basically tell an agency, you've got to cut everything. And if the Pentagon is making poor choices, if it's setting the wrong priorities, if it's wasting money, then an across the board cut is not going to cure that problem. And I know it's tempting to say we could have just spent that money somewhere else, but that's not the way it would have worked. If we had cut 10%, it wouldn't have gone immediately to programs dealing with public health or the COVID emergency or environmental programs. That would have to be a separate decision. And right now we are facing a separate decision, which is completely unrelated to the defense budget, about what are we going to spend? What are we going to be willing to spend to address the coronavirus crisis? And we can do this. We can spend the money that I think every expert, every responsible person says we have to spend right now to try to get our economy going again, even as we continue to defend this country and our security against what I think are some very real threats out there. So I completely understand this concern. And, I'm grateful that you brought it up because it's a serious issue that we need to be debating. But That's where I stand. I just don't support across the board cuts. I want it to be much more surgical. I want it to be much more responsive.
If I may follow up real quickly, I guess the way I see it is it's not so much a cut as, the defense budget has been ballooning in recent years and has grown by $150 billion in the last 3 years. And I guess if I can rephrase it, is it responsible to, allow that budget to increase at by such a large amount?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's increased by $150 billion over the last 3 years, but it is very large. We spend more money on defense than most of the world's countries combined. And so I agree, this is an important issue that we need to debate. I've spent my career, as many of you know, in foreign policy and national security. And in all those years, I've come to the conclusion that, the purpose of our military, the most fundamental purpose of the money that we spend on our military is not to use our military, but to avoid using our military. Because I do believe that we live in a very, very dangerous world. We are being challenged by powers like China, like Russia, who do not like the world that American leadership built over the last 60 or 70 years. We have avoided a global war in all this time. Not since World War II has our country or any country had to deal with the absolute nightmare, the absolute horror of a war between great powers, a war between nuclear powers. And I do believe it is worth spending a generous amount of money to maintain the peace that the United States with its allies has helped maintain in the world. What I'm more concerned about right now is that we are turning away from our allies. I very strongly disagree, and this is very bipartisan in the Congress, with the president's decision, for example, to suddenly pull 12,000 of our troops out of Germany because he's mad at Angela Merkel. This is how we have kept the peace, not by fighting wars, but by maintaining alliances with countries that share our values, that stand up for us and with us when we need them. That's how we stay safe in the world. That's how we get things done that are good for us and good for others. So that is my focus when I think about our foreign policy. Thanks so much.
Thank you both. Our next question comes from Ed. Ed, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. I was having trouble unmuting. Yes, I can hear you. Thank you, Congressman. This is Ed from Flemington. I have a question about the haste with which some of this legislation gets passed. It seems as if everything goes down to the 11th hour and then things get jammed in at the last minute. I'm thinking of the fact that the CARES Act included a provision supposedly for congressional oversight over the spending, yet as soon as it was passed, the White House pushed back against it. There were the Defense Spending Act that passed at the end of 2019 included the Secures Act, which I'm very much opposed to. There were a bunch of tax breaks, which maybe economically made sense, but I don't think anybody understood them, that were included in the CARES Act. What do you do to keep? I mean, the horse trading is one thing, but what do you keep what do you do to keep from getting run over again?
It's a really good question, and I'm glad you're paying attention to how the sausage is made. I'm sorry that it is as disturbing as sausage making usually is. Look, I'll start with a philosophical answer. We are human beings. We're not perfect. There are 535 of us up here. We represent different parts of the country, different interests. We have different ideologies, different views. It's impossible to get major legislation passed without compromises, without deals, without accommodating ideas that you might think don't make a whole lot of sense. It's just the only way it can get done. As Winston Churchill famously said, it's the worst system of government ever invented, except for all the others. And it's been pretty decent for the United States over our 200 and some years of history. I would say that, and this is me tooting my horn and my part of the Congress's horn, but I do think the House of Representatives has been a little bit more responsible here. We have been trying to pass all of our appropriations bills. These are the bills that fund different parts of the U.S. government on time. And we last year passed virtually all of them on time for the first time in, anyone could remember. We're doing it again this year, despite the coronavirus. And the HEROES Act, which was our proposal, our answer to what America needed to do next to tackle the coronavirus, we passed that 2 months ago.
But did it get Republican support?
It didn't. There were many provisions that had Republican support. The overall bill got very little, and that is also kind of a feature of the House of Representatives. We are a more partisan body in the sense that the majority really kind of controls and rules this place. My approach to it was, and I think most of us would have agreed with this, we knew that that bill was not going to be what came out of the sausage making process at the end, right? We knew that we were passing something that Republicans in the Senate could not 100% support. But the way the process is supposed to work is that you put forward your proposal, you introduce a bill, you pass a bill in one house. The other body, in this case the Senate, says, no, we don't agree with all of that. We think you're spending too much money. We think your priorities are a little bit off. What they're supposed to do is put forward their proposal and try to pass it on their side. And then we come together in a conference committee, right? This is like basic government. And we negotiate for a couple of weeks, which is kind of what it took in the CARES Act. And we come up with a compromise. We come up with a deal that we can all live with, right? Where I don't love all of it, but it takes care of the things that I think are the most important. And my Republican colleagues will say the same thing. They don't love all of it. They made some compromises to me that they don't love, but they feel like fundamentally they did something good. The problem, the breakdown came, we passed the HEROES Act and the Senate didn't do anything. Senator McConnell said at that point, he felt no sense of urgency. He didn't say just that he didn't like what we passed. He said, I feel no sense of urgency. We want to see how the coronavirus develops in the United States before we decide what we need to do. And then, of course, we all know what happened. The thing spiked all over the country, including in a lot of states represented by members of Senator McConnell's caucus. And so now they feel a sense of urgency, and we're doing now what we should have done 2 months ago.
They should have been planning ahead instead of waiting to see what might happen.
Well, that's exactly. They should have been willing to negotiate at that point, right? And had we done that, we would have resolved most of these things, probably 75% to my satisfaction, a month ago. And I would have come to you and said, I didn't get everything I wanted. There's this FBI building, or there's not enough money for something I could write. But fundamentally, I voted for something that will help us and that I can stand by. And you know what? I'm pretty sure in about 10 days, I'm going to be able to say that to you. It's just, it should have happened a month ago. And that does make me a little bit angry, I have to say. Because right now, people are suffering, the unemployment benefits, whatever we end up doing with them, they're running out now. We should have gotten this done. But I do feel like we did our job. Even if not everybody agreed, understandably, with the substance of everything that we passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Will. Our next question comes from Audrey. Audrey, can you hear us?
Yep, I can hear you. Thank you. My name's Audrey. I'm 15. I use they, them pronouns from White House Station. And, right now, a lot of us are concerned with, tons of tons of issues. Coronavirus is a huge thing, and I get that. But right now, the climate crisis is a huge problem, and incremental change is not going to cut it right now. We've talked before. I don't know if you remember, but you've talked about your huge support of a carbon fee and a carbon dividend and taxing people based on the amount of carbon emissions that they produce. But we can't wait around to incentivize people with that carbon fee while extreme storms and floods are ravaging our state. We can't wait around while people in disadvantaged and marginalized communities are facing the brunt of this crisis. We in Hunterdon County, a hugely white area, one of the richest counties in the country and in New Jersey. We're pretty privileged here, but there are some people around who are literally facing huge impacts because of this crisis. And those people need you to champion policies that are actually going to, take the drastic action that we need right now, such as the Green New Deal. We've had decades to face these issues. We've had decades to take action such as a carbon fee. And, maybe like 30 years ago, if I was alive, I would have said, yeah, we should totally, implement a carbon fee. But right now, it's just too late to wait around for that. Like they talk about, decades and decades into the future of, the price of carbon going up and going up. And I know I've worked with groups that are, fighting for this in New Jersey, especially. There's a group called the New Jersey Student Climate Advocates that's working on this. But it's just too late right now. We've waited too long. So my question for you is, why don't you support this plan? Why don't you support the Green New Deal? Why are you, sitting on the sidelines? Why are you still waiting around when this crisis is impacting us right now?
Thank you, Audrey, and I don't blame you for being impatient. Yeah, we're preoccupied with coronavirus because people are losing their lives right now, but there's a relationship between these two issues. And what binds them together is science. Like we are paying the price right now in our fight against the coronavirus because some people didn't listen to science. They didn't listen to experts who told us, look, if you don't make these decisions, bad things are going to happen. And I'm afraid, and I know you're afraid, that we're making the same mistake with regard to the climate crisis. We know what is already happening with changes to the weather that are impacting our lives and our economy. And we know what is almost certainly going to happen if we don't take the steps that we need to take. You're challenging me on the Green New Deal, and you're asking, why do you support a carbon fee and dividend rather than the Green New Deal? First, let me explain what the carbon fee and dividend is. That's basically a plan that has been supported by people across the political spectrum, right and left, that says we need to put a real market price on the carbon that we consume as consumers, companies. And as that price is paid to the government, that's the fee, it is then turned around and passed back to us as a dividend that every single citizen of the United States would get, which creates an instant incentive for all of our companies and for all of us as consumers to take the steps that are needed, all of the steps that are needed, to get us to the carbon-free future that we desperately need to get to as soon as possible. So the reason for that is that it's real, it's specific. It's an actual piece of legislation that I can describe to people. I can say, this is exactly how much it's going to cost. This is exactly the economic impact that it's going to have. This is exactly how it's going to affect your family. And my concern about the Green New Deal is that it's a great slogan, but it doesn't actually answer those questions. It's not a piece of legislation. It is not actually a specific policy proposal where I can tell people, here's exactly what we're going to do, how much it's going to cost, how much it's going to benefit. It's basically saying we commit to no more greenhouse gas emissions in 10 years, and not telling us how that fantastical, massive change in our economy and in our daily lives is going to happen. So if you want real change, you've actually got to put real proposals on the table. And if you think that the carbon fee and dividend isn't enough, that it doesn't get the results that we need fast enough, then I totally 100% respect that. But you got to push me on something that's real, and a real piece of legislation that I can explain to everybody on this call will cost this much, will require all of us to make these changes in our lives so that we can understand it and see how it's going to get us to that goal. The real answer, is going to involve 1,000 different things, right? Everything from how we weatherize our homes to the kinds of cars we drive to building up a much bigger and more resilient electrical grid in our country, so that all these electrical cars and other things that we use can actually work. I'm leading an amendment this week, actually, on one of these appropriations bills to put in a lot more federal money into building up electrical charging stations across this country, which is, one small piece of the puzzle. But I think the one thing that will incentivize all of these individual steps is that putting a market price on carbon, because then everybody's got a self-interest in doing the things that are necessary. We won't be forced to do it. We'll have a self-interest to do it. We'll want to do it. So that's where I am. But thanks for raising it. Keep pushing me. We desperately need the activism of young people if we're going to change minds on this issue.
I'll push you right now. You talk about needing specific legislation for the Green New Deal. Like, the Green New Deal itself it's built on that. It's not just one piece of legislation, but it is a framework for changing our entire country as we know it to be better for people. Because, our country is literally built on exploiting people in lower classes or people who have been marginalized in the past decades. And it's built on who can make the most money and rise to the top. But the Green New Deal is not like that. The Green New Deal is about changing everything. It's about making the world a better place for, actual people, and not just our leaders, not just corporations, not just the billionaires, making it better for everyone. And, obviously there does need to be specific legislation, and there has been. There's been a Green New Deal introduced for public housing, the Green New Deal for Public Housing Act. I believe Jay Inslee has introduced specific legislation about the Green New Deal, and that will be coming. But I said this before, but it's past time. It's past time to be incentivizing people. Like, not everyone is inherently good. Like, we can't just incentivize people to change their entire lives. This is gonna require systemic change as well as individual change. You can't just expect everyone to do it. Like, not everyone's like me. Not everyone's just like, oh my gosh, climate crisis is a huge thing. That's exactly
why we need economic incentives, because not everyone's inherently good, and they're going to need to, we're going to need to give them a more selfish argument for doing the right thing. So let's continue our debate, but I do want to get to questions from other folks, if that's okay. Thank you, Audrey.
Sure.
Thank you both. Our next question comes from Phil. Phil, can you hear us? There we go.
Okay, am I unmuted now?
I can hear you.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to be both optimistic and pessimistic a little bit in my question here. 2021 is only about 5 months away, as you know. And thinking optimistically, I'm looking forward to hopefully a new administration and a new Congress and a better-looking Senate. And looking pessimistically, I think we're still going to have this virus to deal with. We probably will have a vaccine coming out, but it's going to take quite a bit of time to get infection rates down. So what do you think the priorities and role should be of Congress in sort of pushing the recovery, both social and economic, forward as we go on through 2020?
Yeah. So one step at a time. We're not in the recovery phase yet. We're still in the relief phase, unfortunately. And, I expressed earlier on my anger about that, because I think we could be in the recovery phase if we had, all of us across the country, taken responsible decisions or had a president who used his authority to ensure that the responsible decisions were made. But here we are. We're going to need to do another phase of pure relief just to help people get through this. So that's still where we are right now. For recovery, I think that the best thing Congress can do to stimulate real economic recovery is investing in infrastructure. And we passed in the House in the last month our infrastructure bill, which has a lot of stuff that I worked on for New Jersey, including stuff that will help us build and complete the Gateway Tunnel project, and also a lot of provisions that will help transform our transportation sector into one that is less reliant on fossil fuels, which also coincidentally good for New Jersey, where we rely so much on rail. So that's a great way of not just fixing things that need to be fixed, not just improving our trains and our ports and our airports, which we all need anyway, but also a great way of putting people to work in America, and stimulating the recovery that we're desperately going to need as we come out of the coronavirus crisis. We got that done in the House. I think having a president who is willing to go big on infrastructure, not just every 12th tweet, but consistently, will help. I still haven't given up on having a deal with President Trump on this, because again, he has said from time to time that he does want to do something big on infrastructure. I think it would be good for him in terms of his reelection if he were to actually sit down and work with us on something like that. But if we don't get it done this summer or fall, it's going to be really high up on the agenda for early action in January and February. And the timing might actually turn out to be right, because I'm afraid you are right that COVID, given how we've dealt with it, is probably going to be with us up and down through the fall.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, everyone. The Congressman does need to run. So thank you, everyone. I know we still have a list full of people, but we do appreciate you joining in today and asking your questions. I'll throw it back over to the Congressman for closing remarks.
Thank you, everybody, so much. This was an excellent set of questions. I'm really sorry I didn't have time today to answer everybody live. But as we mentioned, if you leave us your question in the chat, we will do our best to get back to everybody. And of course, anybody, as DeAndre mentioned, who has any issues with the unemployment benefits, stimulus checks, small business loans, immigration issues, please email us at the address that he posted, and we'll do our best. I've got all of my staff, including our legislative staff in Washington, spending all or at least part of their time working to help constituents on these individual cases. We know that this is a time of great need for everybody. And I don't want to just pass the legislation. I want to make sure that everybody back home who is entitled to the benefits that we provide actually gets them. So with that, thank you again so much for participating. I'm going to keep on doing these until we can do them again in person. I love to hear from you. It helps me shape my priorities. I love being challenged and confronted with the different points of view. Really important for me to be able to do my job well. So thanks to all of you who did that. See you soon. Bye-bye.